Okay, so thank you all for joining. And Matthias, I thank you so much for participating in this interview that we put on YouTube for the world to know the remarkable work that you're doing for the greater good of the world and the community at large. So we thank you so much for coming. And as always, we begin all things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands which we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. All right, so let's begin. So please, Matthias, if you can introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners about your remarkable work.
Thanks so much, and thanks for spending time with me. So I'm Matthias Oschinski. I'm an economist by training, and I founded a company called Belongnomics about 3 years ago. And the main motivation for this was behind it was we have a lot of disruptions going on at the moment with technology, with climate change, and a lot of other factors that kind of change the shape of society and the shape of the economy. And one of my motivations why I actually studied economics was always to support those who are more vulnerable in society. And the idea that's behind Belongnomics is to say, how can we help shape the current trends in technology and what's happening with climate change and demographic changes to the benefit of the greater society, and not just that technology benefits a select few. And so that is kind of the vast majority of the projects that I'm doing and the biggest focus of my work.
Wonderful. Very, very good. And can you share a little bit about the incredible the background and why you founded Belongnomics?
So I started to research the impact of technology on the labor market about 10 years ago. And the more I dug into this, the more I realized this is going to be a big game changer for, not just transforming the labor force, but also the way we live and work. And and there's a really great potential that, it will lead to it can lead to more inequality. And technology has been a major driver for the inequality in the last 40 or 50 years or so. And I think we have a chance to say, okay, how can we set up or moderate this change that is coming through new technologies now, so that everybody can participate and not that it doesn't continue the way it's been going before, where only a select few, like when you think about Canada, for instance, since the early 1980s or so, the biggest benefits, biggest economic benefits came to the richest 1% and the richest 5% in the country, and the lower 50% actually lost money in real terms. So the question is, how can we shape current trends and current disruptions in a way that benefit society overall, and not just the richest 1% or the richest 5%?
So needed. Oh my goodness. That is so needed. And can you articulate your personal mission and vision for me?
So the mission is really driven by how can we combat inequality and create more opportunities for all. How can we have a society where everybody is on the same footing and has similar opportunities compared to the people who have the best opportunities now. And the other one is also, since I'm an economist, a lot of the focus that we have in economics is on GDP, the growing GDP number and generating economic growth. But the real question behind this is actually, what's the purpose of growth and what's the purpose of innovation? And for me, the purpose of growth and innovation is that society as a whole should be better off. So I also want to move away a little bit from the main focus on looking at GDP numbers and measuring a country's success in GDP numbers, and get to a bigger discussion on what's the well-being in the country, like how are people actually benefiting from this. And so moving away from this one single measure of GDP growth to a more holistic set of measurements to say like, okay, how can we measure health outcomes better, and educational outcomes, and social things like social cohesion and these kind of things. So I think that's a key factor here as well, to broaden the view a little bit on how we measure success for society.
Okay, sure. Okay, so how important is economic development in your work?
Yeah, so that kind of ties really back well to the mission that I just explained. So economic development basically meaning how do we measure outcomes and how do we measure economic success for a population. So in that sense, I'm trying to take a more holistic approach to say like, what are uh, outcomes for people in terms of economic opportunities, health outcomes, better environmental outcomes. And this is exactly why what I just said about why the vision and the mission is so tied to moving away from just the single indicator of GDP growth and moving towards a more holistic set of indicators that kind of measure what are the true outcomes for people on the ground, and not just for you can have a very good GDP measure for a country, but it doesn't mean that everybody has a better life and a better health outcome, or that the environment actually is doing well. So in that sense, the question is always what is the focus point, and how do we measure success when we talk about economic development? And so I think I try to be very holistic in my approach and when I look at these issues.
Exactly. Yeah, I was just actually listening to somebody who was saying, statistically, I think it was on Bloomberg, statistically, Canada's doing great, but people on the ground like us who are living it every day, seeing things every day, it's not all what the graph and charts and pie charts say. When you speak to people on the ground who are really going through it and going through the experiences. So I get exactly what you're saying. And
Yeah.
yes, what inspires you most about your current work?
I think uh, it's a number of things. One is that it's always what I always try is to collaborate with organizations where it has a true impact, so that you actually see the change. And so when I did my PhD and you're in academia, a lot of the focus is on writing papers, and that's nice. I like writing papers, but the question is always what comes next, so. And there's actually a study that came out a couple of years ago that shows that when you're in academia and you write academic papers, on average 5 people read them, and one of them is your mother, usually, because your parents want to be proud of you. So but then the question is, what do you actually achieve with what you do? And so one of what inspires me about my work is that I always try to look for collaborators where what we research and come up with has immediate impact, being be it as like in terms of like making concrete policy prescriptions to people. Or one time I had a team where we developed an algorithm or an app where people could look for that people whose jobs were disrupted by technology could look for other opportunities based on their skill sets and so on. So it's just having this concrete outcome and this measurable impact of the work that inspires me. And then it's also the organizations I collaborate with. I think you learn a lot from others, and getting new perspectives and fresh perspectives when you have this exchange with other people. And that's always like I'm by nature a very curious person. For me, it's always nice to learn something new, also through others and through the lens of how other people live and how they view and experience things in life.
That's right. That's right. Those personal experiences for sure. And what challenges and barriers do you face in your work, and how do you and your colleagues or your team work to overcome them?
Yeah, I think some of the barriers in my case, it's we try to work a lot with data and because what we want to do is like evidence, like showing the evidence and doing evidence-based work. And in some cases, you don't really have the data, the sufficient data to do to get to the nitty-gritty of like what's really going on and what's on the ground. I just finished a project on the indigenous population in Nunavut, for instance. And to some degree, there is better data now that there was, for instance, 10 years ago. But for a lot of the aspects that are really relevant to the indigenous population there, uh, there's not a sufficient amount of databases that you can really get the evidence base to say like, well, this is what needs to change, or this is what it's really like. And the way we try to overcome this or address this in many ways is to, speak to people directly with focus group interviews and so on, or we run our own surveys. I just finished a big project on the gig economy in Canada, and there's, a lot of the vulnerable groups among gig workers are racialized Canadians and new immigrants. And we actually ran a pretty large survey to get their perspectives on what the obstacles are that they face in the work, what the conditions are that they face in the work, so that we could better address how we need to change regulations on gig work to enable to make their lives better, to improve their work experiences and so on. So it's a lot of what we're trying to address is through getting better evidence so that we can make more tailored proposals and to say like how can we help this group better than they're being helped right now or supported right now.
Very good. Very good. That's very needed as well. For
Yeah,
sure. Right?
in some
Oh,
cases for sure.
yeah, yeah. And so, what would you say is the set key priorities for you right now and for your work?
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. So I think there's two. One is the looking at the impact of artificial intelligence on how it changes society and especially labor and skills. And I'm just in discussions with a couple of colleagues to also look into how education needs to change in terms of what kind of skills do we need to teach, but also how it will affect schools and universities with these new technologies and what this does actually mean for uh, the way we teach and the content that we teach. And the other one is climate change because I think it's probably the biggest challenge for all of us right now. Is can we still have a livable planet uh, with the degree that it's temperatures are rising, and what does it mean for uh, society and also for the labor market when we have this changing climate right now. A couple of things we can do, to try to mitigate climate change, but there's also the adaptation to climate change because a lot of the emissions that are already in the atmosphere, they will still affect the climate for the next decades and so on. And so some of our work is kind of geared towards like, okay, how can we make sure that we have achieve a certain level of sustainability with our economic activity, but also how can we ensure that we support those who are most vulnerable through climate change and ensure that they are sufficiently protected as well.
Great. And how do you feel about the future of finance in Canada?
The future of finance. Do you mean the banking sector in general, or something more specific?
Yeah, I think specifically, like just based on maybe if we're talking about equity within Canada, and as far as finding that balance, and how do you feel that it's going to go? Like just a estimated projection. Do you feel are we on an upcline, a decline, you know?
I think that's a tricky question. I think the problem that Canada has is that there are a couple of new innovations that are kind of disrupting the sector for the better, actually, like that try to break in to make to give more equitable access for people to the finance industry. But the problem that I see in Canada is there's very little. The market is kind of dominated by a couple of big players. Like in the banking sector, for instance, you have like three big banks, and they kind of dominate everything. And so the question is, whenever you have like let's say new startups coming up who develop tools that would make the things more equitable for the common people, so to speak. There's a risk that when you have just a few major players in the market, that they just buy up these new startups and then integrate them, and so nothing can rock the boat and nothing can change. And what I see in Canada as a big problem, and I've tried to address this over the years that I've lived there, is the 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 resistance or the reluctance to let more competition into the market. Like you have, the three big banks. You have also the three big players in with Rogers, Bell, and Telus with the cell phone market. When I moved from Germany to Canada, and it was at least three times more expensive for me to own a cell phone in Canada than it would have been in Germany. And that comes down to the fact that you have a lot of big player or a number of big players dominating the market, and you don't have enough. You don't allow for enough new players to come in and compete to the benefits of the broader population. The same thing with why people always say like, oh, groceries in Canada are so expensive, and the thing is, it's like you also have I think three big players who dominate about 70% or 75% of the market. And that's for me the biggest problem is that you need to allow for more competition, but I haven't seen much in the sense that the political willingness to lower the barriers for entry, for other players to come into the market and then generate this competition that would actually lower prices for all and have create more access for people and so on. So I think this is, in my view, one of the biggest issues that I see with the economy there. But I've mentioned it in a number of places, and I didn't make many friends in the industry there. So because for a lot of people it's convenient because the way it is, like if it's nice the way it is, and they benefit from it, but the larger population is not benefiting. And so this is why I sometimes think that this is one key thing that definitely needs to be addressed, I think.
For sure. I like to call it the big players playground is Canada,
Yeah, it's that's a good
they
picture
just put
actually.
their pieces like chessboard. They just lock down their pieces, and the smaller people, the everyday people who are trying to just make it day to day. It's like I don't know. I'm just trying to create a board game in my head. Maybe I have to create one for Canada.
Yeah, that could drive the message home actually. So I mean, like this is
Yeah.
because I've seen this as a really big change from moving from Europe to Canada, where in the EU you have much more access to everything, because uh, people and companies can work and live in all these different EU countries, and then you come to Canada, and then it's even within different provinces you have barriers between the trade and whatever, and so it's very cemented in many ways. And I think to break this open, it might be politically risky, and that's why maybe some parties don't want to do it. but I think for the broader population to benefit more from new innovations and from lower prices, this is something that definitely needs to happen, I think.
Absolutely. Okay, and are there any regulatory barriers uh, to let me just say regulatory barriers to your work and potential proposed legislative remedies? I was getting tongue tied.
Yeah, that's a tough
So,
sentence.
regulatory barriers to your work. Yeah.
For my work, I don't. I wouldn't say necessarily no. There's not too much in that because I mean in my work it's mostly focused on doing the research and looking for research collaborators, and luckily there's not much in terms of a barrier in my case. The only the only barrier if I to just tie it into what we just discussed is like when you present the evidence and then you say okay based on the evidence in our view this is what needs to change, then it's often up to the those who have the power if they have the willingness to change something or not, and that's something that we can't influence really, unfortunately. So we can only present you know trying to present the evidence as best as we can find it and put it together, and then hope that this wins over ideologies or some other influential factors that people see like okay, it makes sense to change things in this way or that way or something. But yeah, that's the only issue.
Right. No problem. All right. And what is your ultimate goal, and what does success look like to you and your colleagues?
uh, so I mean, for me, I mean that's definitely the dream. But the ultimate goal for me would be to help create a society where everybody has the same opportunities and where people can live the life that they dream of, have the same opportunities as everybody else, and to help contribute to that. That would be that's kind of the whole motivator of why we're doing what we're doing, and this would be that would be the ultimate success, I guess. So far, I think every project we do, we just hope that we inch it more in that direction, so to speak, to get there eventually. And I think the more the more collaborators we can get, the more groups we can work together with, I think the better chance we have, because then as we grow as a coalition, so to speak, to work on this together, the more chances we might have to achieve that goal.
To achieve, that's right. Great. And okay, so do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action?
Well, I think calls to action for me is the biggest one is probably that staying engaged and civic engagement and doing something about a problem really matters. I think I've just finished a book on the history of technology and how things have changed, and the positive changes that came about in society always happened from the grassroots, from people not accepting the outcomes and saying like we need this to change and we need to um, remind people who are in power that things need to be different. And so I think the call to action for me would be not to just to accept the outcomes as they are, but really to stay active, stay engaged, and to kind of push for the change that you want to see. Basically, I think that's really important.
Absolutely. That's perfect way to end off. Really appreciate that. Well, it's perfect. Perfect words to end off. And we would just want to, say thank you again. We appreciate you, your time, your leadership, and we look forward to collaborating with you in future. And anything else that comes up, we can't wait to meet. So thank you so much again. I really appreciate it. And on behalf of SETSI, you have a wonderful day. And yeah, look out for it on YouTube.
Thank you so much,
Oh,
and
and
thanks for spending time.
Yes, sorry about that. And we have to close. Sorry, I was getting caught up. We have to close the way we started. Okay. So we will close the way we began with this interview by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders, community stalwarts, whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty.